4, 5, 6 talks, on the same sort of teaching or overall idea. And sometimes there'll be a book involved that we're working from, and everyone can get the book if they want to. But we'll try to do it in such a way that it's still interesting to just show up whenever you can show up. But maybe even more interesting if you're able for a stretch of time, for a month or something, say, I'm going to get down there every Wednesday and hear the next talk on the Heart Sutra or the such and so teaching or something like that. So that's kind of the idea, and maybe we would call Wednesday night Dharma Seminar, I was thinking. But it's still Wednesday night and it's still practice, so it doesn't matter what you call it, really. It's not that different. And the little chant experiment is kind of just, I thought it'd be fun to do something different after decades of the same chants, for one thing, but also that one's sort of sweet. Dogen is expressing his enthusiasm and joy for the Dharma, and his humility too, that recognizing that we all need support, we all need a bigger perspective, and the way he's asking for the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas to help him awaken and help him be his best self. So I thought that was kind of nice, and I wasn't super familiar with that. I met it just intimately. I chanted it before over the years, but I met it more intimately earlier last year and gave some talks about it when I was visiting another Sangha. So I thought, let's bring this one up. And maybe it kind of ties into the sort of idea of sort of depth and continuity on Wednesday night to hear Dogen basically telling us, just love this stuff, His other stuff makes it sound like you're supposed to understand or something. That one doesn't really sound like understanding, right? It sounds like, please help me, I'm open to that. So I'd already kind of been on a theme in the fall. I got interested in taking a deeper dive look at the little chants in our sutra book. And the last one I looked at with you was a while ago, and they're on the website. It was the end of November, where we took a deep dive into the verse that we just chanted, the one that's before the talk. And one fun discovery there was that the first line about an unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma turns out to be a straight-up quotation from the Lotus Sutra. It says that in the Lotus Sutra, that's the Dharma we revere and are excited about. And what's cool about Chinese is there's so many different characters, and you put a block of 4 or 6 or 8 of them together in a certain order. There's not that many times, even in thousands of pages, that exact block of characters reappears. And so they could find that same block of characters that's behind our English translation there in the Lotus Sutra, so they can be pretty confident that whoever created that chant was quoting the Lotus Sutra. So that's pretty fun. It's fun to have a little sense of where things come from. And maybe one of these times we'll do a Lotus Sutra thing on Wednesday nights too, but it's just a vast and interesting and kind of cosmic teaching about the nature of Buddhahood and about us. And it seems very contrasty to Zen. It's very sort of, it's like psychedelic practically, some of the scenes in there. These just vivid scenes of incredible things happening. And yet Zen, for its austerity and its simplicity, really treasures that. And Dogen loved the Lotus Sutra. He also quotes the Lotus Sutra all the time. So it's kind of interesting. Like this thing that we received has got so much, richness and depth. And some of that's a little bit obscured to us because we're doing all this in translation. So with the help of online dictionaries, now we have, who knows what city that is, an invented city maybe. Maybe you better just turn it off if we can't get it to work. Oh, I have it here, huh? Sorry, yeah, you can't turn it off. That's too bad. I had things I was going to use it for. Yeah, neat. Do you want to play with it some more? Yeah. Okay. It's always worked before. So anyway, last time we looked at that chant, the one before the Dharma talk, and so tonight I thought we'd look at the one after the Dharma talk. So we're just working our way through. And first, a little story, which is that one time when I was 15 or 16, I was browsing in a bookstore, I remember exactly where the bookstore was. It was in Stanford Shopping Center, across the way from Palo Alto, California, where I spent my teenage years. And I found a book about Buddhism on a display table. And I just flipped it open out of curiosity. I didn't think I had ever seen a Buddhist book before. I started reading a little bit of cognitive psychology that I got in the library, so maybe that's somehow connected to this. Okay, let me just try HDMI 1 again, and then we'll give it up. Maybe the cable got unplugged at the other end or something. No. Okay. To be debugged later. Alright. Forget about that. So anyway, I opened up this book and just flipped it open on a random page. And on that page there was a verse with some white space around it. I don't know what the exact translation was, but the verse was something like, beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Oh, turn on the recording if you would too, Aiden. Oh, cool. Okay. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. And Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. So if you've been before, that should all sound familiar. It's what we're going to chant after the talk. The so-called 4 Bodhisattva vows. And I don't really remember what I said or thought or felt at the moment, but it really brought me up short, these 4 lines. I didn't pause to try to figure it out or read the surrounding text, because there was like blocks of text all around it, which must have had some context for why they were quoting it. I don't think I read that. I just took a breath and was impressed. Like, wow. Closed the book and kept doing whatever I was doing. But it must have impressed me, because otherwise, why would I remember that moment more than 40 years later? Something there for me, maybe for you too. Well, maybe the first thing you notice about these 4 vows, if you think about them, and it's totally legit to just chant this stuff and not think about it too much, that's fine, We maybe overthink things as it is. But if you think about it, one of the things you noticed, probably right away, is how utterly impossible these vows are. I mean, I don't know that I could save one being, I don't know if I could save myself. What does it even mean to save anything or anybody? Not to mention numberless beings. And the second one, and if you want to look at these in your chant book, if that helps you stay oriented, it's on the page we just had open. The second one about delusions, like, well, that seems a little more approachable, don't you think? Like maybe you have a handle on a few of your delusions and can notice them and release from them. There's that crazy way of thinking, or that worry, or that projection. Oh, I'm assuming the worst from so-and-so again, right? So that's actually noticing a delusion and cutting it off, not letting it run us. So you can probably do that once in a blue moon, right? Maybe sometimes. But and maybe sometimes the delusion grabs hold of you. I've felt this way lately. I lived into a delusion and didn't release from it until later, till after the reactivity, after I'd done something grouchy or, maybe hurt somebody's feelings a little bit too, darn it, A little later, like, oh, yeah, that was me being, it was pent-up aggression, or that was impatience, or that was assuming something that I, and so on and so forth. That was whatever it was. So sometimes you notice your delusions after the fact, but it must be that the vast amount of our delusions we're unaware of, and we take for reality and feel justified in, and it's just part of how it is, right? Being ourselves. So this vow, that they're inexhaustible, yeah, that seems true, right? But that we'll end them all, that we'll be free from them. We won't be caught by any of them. So that's impossible. And the next one about Dharma gates, to enter all the Dharma gates. I don't know, I've always felt a little encouraged by that one. How about you? Like, also impossible. But it seems like less of a bummer, that I'll never accomplish that, because it'd be fun to try, right? And a Dharma gate could be anything. It's not just reading a verse in a book or going to a Dharma talk or sitting in formal meditation, right? Maybe it's working with those delusions. Maybe that's a Dharma gate, Some way that we're opening to the way it is. Some way we're using wisdom and compassion, using teachings. Maybe it's navigating something difficult with a friend, or maybe it's, in some way responding to our current insane political situation with a little more something, a little more wisdom or a little more compassion, maybe. And there's probably there are a lot of Dharma gates we're aware of, and sometimes we do veer away from them, for sure. We're tentative, or we're tired, or we're scared, We can notice ourselves passing up Dharma gates, but then we can notice ourselves entering Dharma gates. But just like the other two before it, there must be boundless other Dharma gates we're completely unaware of, entering them or not entering them. We don't perceive them. And then we have becoming Buddha. We often do say here that it's not about sort of becoming Buddha, although the vow sounds that way, but more like dropping the delusion that we aren't Buddha. And that's a delusion, so that's back to the second one. So this is the usual way of these little sets of teachings. One of them always refers to all the other ones, and they are all interdependent and interpenetrated. So one thing that's nice is you don't have to remember all the stuff. Just pay attention to the one in whatever the list of things is that really speaks to you, because it's going to contain all the others. So that can be your one. Just work with that, Not be constantly like, what are the other, the 8 of this, 10 of that, There's lists and lists and lists and lists. So I dug into this a little bit, just kind of curious where they came from. And bizarrely, there's also an origin story here in the Lotus Sutra. Maybe it's all just comes back to the Lotus Sutra in the end. Why do we study anything else? And we know this because the Tiantai master, which is another form of Buddhism in China, 6th century, the 500s, named Master Zhiyi, Romanized Zhiyi. It's hard to make it out when you hear it, Zhiyi. He came up with proto Bodhisattva vows. That is clear the Zen people took his idea and worked with it. So I'll share a little bit about that. This is what I was going to put on the screen, so maybe next time I'll show you. But his first version was a quotation from the Lotus Sutra, which then he commented on, and then later, in a later work, he did another version that's pretty close to our Bodhisattva vows. So here's the one that's quoting directly from the Lotus Sutra. It's in the, if you've studied the Lotus Sutra, this is in the Medicine Plants chapter. Those not yet ferried across, I will cause to cross. Those not yet understanding, I will cause to understand. Those not yet at peace, I will cause to be at peace. Those not yet in nirvana, I will cause to obtain nirvana. And one thing to notice in there is that little verb phrase that repeats, I will cause. So it uses an underlying Chinese word that means exactly that, I'm going to make it happen, I'm your guy, I'm going to help you. I'm going to make you understand and be at peace and obtain nirvana, which is deep, deep, ultimate peace. And ferried across is a reference. It's all in Buddhism all over the place about we're on the side of the river where things are nuts. That's true. The world of conditions and greed, hate, and delusion, and then also love and passion and everything else. And there's a river to cross to get to the other side, which is the other side is nirvana. And maybe it's a pretty wide river, maybe with really fast current, hard to cross. So ferried across is directly referring to that. So this is initial version just coming straight from the Lotus Sutra. I haven't actually found it in the Lotus Sutra myself, but I shall do. Then in a later work, here's his one that's like a proto version of the Bodhisattva vows. And it'll be easier when you see this. Those not yet saved from suffering, I'll cause them to be saved. So suffering, that's the same, like saving beings, suffering. Those not yet understanding the cause, I will cause them to understand. So this is more Four Noble Truths now. And delusions are definitely involved in the cause of suffering, though, so it all connects. Third one, in this proto-vows, those not yet at peace in the path, I cause them to be at peace. So that's entering Dharma gates, the path, also the third noble truth. Those not yet attaining cessation, I will cause them to attain it. And it sounds in English pretty far from our Bodhisattva vows, but there's more overlap with the Chinese characters than you quite hear in the English. But then what are definitely recognizably our Bodhisattva vows show up for the first time, at least amongst the texts that survive. Like, who knows what really happened, thousands of years ago. And this is in the Platform Sutra, which is a famous sutra which is telling the most important early stories of Buddhism in China. Famous stories that kind of shaped the tradition from then on. It turns out historically, maybe none of it actually happened, but it's all the more important the way it's thought about. And with this sutra, the Platform Sutra, there's two main versions that are hundreds of years apart. So this literature is not just like the Buddha said it 3,000 years ago and it stayed intact, right? It's like any other human thing. Even if it's humans inspired by Buddha or humans who are Buddha, things change over time. So there's an earlier version which was found in this huge cache of documents. This was like the most important discovery in Buddhist studies ever. And right around 1900, I think it was 1911 or something like that, they discovered this massive cave in the desert east of China, in a little oasis town called Dongwang, with thousands and thousands. A huge library had been like sealed up, thousands and thousands of scrolls of Buddhist texts, and Buddhist scholars have been like reading it ever since. But I don't know that they've processed it all to this day. Anyway, there's a version of the Platform Sutra in that stash which was dated to the 8th century. So this is a couple of 100 years later than the other master, who was in a previous school, or a cousin school, I guess you could say. Like the Tiantai school are like our older cousins. And we're the upstarts, Probably the Tiantai people are like, oh man, they're kind of bratty. Jeez. Think they know everything. So in there, that sutra has Wei Ning, the central character, sharing this vow. I vow to save the limitless beings of my mind. I vow to cut the infinite afflictions of my mind. I vow to learn the boundless Dharma gates of my own mind. I vow to complete the supreme Buddha way of my... sorry, I said that one wrong. I'm going to start over. I vow to save the limitless beings of my own mind. I vow to cut the infinite afflictions of my own mind. I vow to learn the boundless Dharma gates of my own nature. It changes there. I vow to learn the boundless Dharma gates of my own nature. I vow to complete the supreme Buddha way of my own nature. So you can hear basically hear our vows in there, but Zen, through this sutra and through the character of Wei Ning, kind of brings it home in a certain way, right? The earlier version was, I see all you suffering beings out there, I'm going to fix it, and had that strong verb that meant I'm going to cause this to happen. And this loses that verb, which is ling in Chinese, and replaces it with vow. So instead of saying, I'm going to do it, I vow to do it. So there's a totally different flavor to that, right? It's aspiration. It's still serious, like I'm doing something, I'm committed. But I'm not saying that I'm the one doing it. I'm vowing to do it. I'm vowing that it somehow happens. And that it's not you beings out there. I recognize that it's all happening through my mind and through my nature, which is the nature of everything. So the first two he says of my own mind, so there's some degree of, transformational work around the mind that's afflicted and the mind that's suffering, right? But the second two with Dharma and Buddha is something to do with the nature of the universe, to be more in harmony with the nature of the universe. So it's also not causing it to happen, right? It's being more in accord with. So that's like the proto version, right before our version. And then exactly the same characters that we chant are found in a later version of the same sutra called the Platform Sutra. And this is dated from the 13th century, so what's that, 500 years later? And that version, which became the standard thing that most everybody would chant, and it's the main one translated. If you've read up on this stuff, Red Pine goes back to the old one, one of his choices. But more often it's this later one that's studied. And it's kind of like tidied, They added some stuff and smoothed some rough edges and maybe added additional learning of 500 years of practice, So it's not necessarily a worse one because it's tidied up and a little less sort of raw. And in that they also wanted something that chanted well. So here we can't really hear the chanting in Chinese because I couldn't pronounce it properly. But they made the lines all the same number of characters, so it's a block of 4 lines of 7 characters each that says what we chant, that sentient beings are limitless, are boundless. I vow to save them. And here's a pretty literal translation, actually. Ours has a little bit of gloss in it to make it nicer in English. But here's a very literal translation from the 7 characters per line in Chinese. Beings limitless, vow to save. Afflictions limitless, vow to sever. Dharma gates limitless, vow to learn or study. Unsurpassed Buddha way, vow to complete. See, you can hear it's right there. And this actually sounds good in Chinese and sounds pretty good in Sino-Japanese and sounds perfectly decent in English. So you can see a kind of evolution here from, in all kinds of ways, a sense of more integration and less of a sense of separateness, which is Zen's hallmark, right? Not to buy into so much this idea of, excuse me, of separateness, of this and that, which they fancily call, dualistic thinking, right? To free yourself from dualistic thinking. And that sort of radical interpenetration that Dogen was talking about all the time, that if one being is saved, all beings are saved, and this is that being, right? This is that being. But, speaking of saving, the character that the translators translate as to save is a pretty interesting one. I'm looking forward to showing you this on the screen another week. It actually has an original Chinese meaning, which is just to measure. You're like, to measure? How did to measure end up being to save? Well, it turns out that the Chinese translators in the sort of 4th, 5th, 6th centuries mainly had some big problems to solve when they're trying to figure out how to translate Sanskrit Buddhism. Because Sanskrit Buddhism is loaded with complex terminology, in ways that everyday Sanskrit words got reused and new Sanskrit words were invented. And that had already been happening for, 600-800 years, right? So they had to figure out how to make all this work in Chinese with its set of characters and sounds. And one of the ones that really flummoxed them, apparently, I was reading a scholarly book about this, at least bits of it, was a word we actually were talking about on Sunday, the word paramita, which means kind of like to go beyond, or can also be translated as perfect. And it's put with important qualities for us to practice, like generosity paramita, generosity that goes beyond generosity. So at first they did, one of the things they would do would be to try to transliterate a Sanskrit word. But that must have been really hard for the Chinese to read, Because what they were doing is picking kind of random words that hadn't make the right sounds. But if you look at the characters in terms of meaning, it would have looked like gibberish. I wish I'll try to think of an English version that makes some kind of sense. But seven banana mountain rice or something, and you're like, what? But then you have to listen in your mind to the sounds, and the sounds are kind of like these Sanskrit sounds, which you've never necessarily even heard before, right? So at first they used 4 characters to transliterate paramita. But then some genius decided that this character, just pronounced du, would be a much better thing to do. Just one character that everyone would learn. This is what it's being used for, and it's this character for to measure. And later scholars believe the logic was something like, well, if I can measure the river, I can find a way across. I can kind of take the measure of reality and find a way to go beyond it, because it doesn't mean save, it means going beyond, right? It means crossing and going beyond. And so in our vow, beings are numberless, I vow to save them, that's the character that's used. It's not actually a character that means to save, but it means to help across, which kind of means to save. So I think in our case, we're probably the result of 19th century English and other European scholars who are all Christians, or at least brought up in the church. And there's this idea of salvation, right? So to carry someone across is salvation, is to save them, like you pray and the missionaries were saving people. So I suspect we have this Christian missionary mishmash in our vows. Darn. But at least we know what it means. It's okay, It's like, okay, save. We can mean whatever we want by save, But think about it that way. Look at that line in the book there. Beings are numberless. I vow to help them across. It's a different feeling, right, than saving them. And it's a lot closer to the meaning of the characters. Or maybe I help is I'm separate from them, which the whole thing from Weineng about in my mind, right, with my mind, that's not quite it. So maybe it's something like sentient beings are boundless, crossing together, or something like that. How about that? Crossing together. I vow to cross together. We will all cross together. We'll all go beyond together. Which means you're doing something, right? You're showing up. You're not just like, yeah, take me with you when you go. You're doing something. But you're not fixing anybody or saving anybody. But you're being in some way like a facilitator and a support for what we all need. And thus we all need together, right? So this was really fun for me. And this is all, by the way, inspired by a book from Nelson Foster called Rediscovering the Treasures of John. So he kind of got into this too. And this is one of the characters he got interested in. And I had read that a while ago, and then I was trying to study the vows. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the one Nelson talking about. So that was super fun. So let's talk a little bit about what these vows actually mean for us, and not just let me geek out for the whole time. So I thought we'd do a practice, which we'll do, and we'll practice tonight, of being in a small group with some structure, a structured conversation. Sometimes we call this monologues because one person's going to speak at a time. Although monologue usually sounds like the person's being boring. This is anything but boring, and we'll have a topic, usually kind of a broad topic. And here it can be reading these vows and looking at these vows, whether you're looking at them for the first time tonight or have chanted them 1,000 times. How do they speak to you? What do they mean to you? Do one or two of those 4 seem more important or more valuable or more useful or more annoying or more intimidating or more something, What do you think about this bit about save not really being save, in that kind of theological saving way, and the nice thing here is that you have a lot of support to explore out loud. You don't have to have a clue what you're going to say. If your mind's like constricting, like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say, see what happens, It's sort of a patience practice. I'll see what happens. Kind of being generous with yourself. And you'll have 5 minutes to see what comes out of your mouth, and there could be a fair amount of silence in there too as you read them and breathe and wonder what matters here to you. And if nothing really comes, then you can sit quietly. If anybody can listen without needing you to say anything. This would be this gang, right? And you'll be in little groups of 3, did I say that? And the other 2 of you will just be deeply listening, just present, just listening, not interjecting, not like, yeah, you got this, or not like, me too. A little nodding and smiling is okay, we can't help it, but just to be relaxed and kind and warm and listen to the person whose turn it is to speak. And I'll use a bell to time it too, so you won't have to keep track of the time. And let's just see what comes up for us around living these vows. What are they? What are they for you? And also to recognize that any answer you give is completely, provisional, and what's coming to you now, and subject to revision. We're not going to be like next week we'll see you and say, hey, did you, da, da, da. No. In fact, why don't we just kind of forget about whatever the person said with love, not with forgetfulness, but just like, we'll just leave it here. What's said in the Zendo stays in the Zendo kind of thing. Is that Rome or Vegas usually? I don't know which. Okay, so once you find yourself a group of 2, maybe people you're just meeting or people you know, doesn't matter. And we can rearrange the cushions a little bit, make a little jumble of the Zendo and get tied in with your little triad. And then once everybody's found their people, I'll ring the bell and kind of talk you through it. And Zoomers, Aiden can put you in a breakout so you can talk. Oh, hey Deborah. You could talk to me maybe. Oh, there's 2 of me. So I'll get them going, and then we can both unmute and talk a little bit. So just a sec. More or less groups of 3, huh? That's good. You're meeting each other and exchanging names, and then all you really need is 1 volunteer to be the first speaker. Anybody feeling courageous? And then let's actually just sit in silence for a minute to settle the space. I'll ring the bell. Close your eyes if you want, or lower your gaze. Just to kind of relax into this new configuration here. Feels different, right? And then when the bell rings, the first person can start speaking when you're ready, and the other 2 just deeply listening. What do these vows mean to you? And maybe they don't mean anything. You want to talk about something else. That's fine also. Okay,